Good evening, everyone. This is EE 370. We are at lecture 3. So I would like to first address 3 questions that I got after the previous class. The first question was, can we implement a sequential element using wires? Right? What do you think? Yes, no? So let me give you an example. Right? Let me show you a mux circuit. Okay. There is some select signal. This is your out. Let's say this is your input, and this input I connected to out signal. Right? This is now a sequential element. Right? Maybe if I replace the select signal with a clock, what is this circuit? Have you seen this before? Something like this? Have you heard of a latch? Right? What is the behavior of the latch? Retains a value when? So in this particular case, when clock is equal to 0, what is the output? Yeah, it is holding the previous value, right? And when clock is equal to 1, then the input goes to output. Right? So when clock is equal to 1, the latch becomes transparent. When clock is equal to 0, it has memory. It is holding the previous value. Now I can implement this by declaring out as a wire data type. So let me show you how that can be done. So there is this conditional statement, which is a ternary operator, where the syntax is like this. So you give the condition, then question mark. If the condition is true, then what needs to be executed is written here, colon. If the condition is false, what needs to be executed is written here. Right? This is a ternary operator. It can handle 3 operands. So I could write, let's say I declare my out as a wire. Then I can simply give the definition, simply assign a value to out like this. Assign out equal to, what should be the condition? Clock. Right? So I can directly say clock. You can do clock equal to 1 or clock equal to 0. If I directly say clock, that becomes a condition that you are checking for. Clock is either 0 or 1. Right? Now if clock is 1, what is the out value? I. It is I. And if clock is 0, out. It is out. Right? So potentially I can implement a memory element using wire if I want to. Right? But this is not something that I would recommend. And let me explain a little bit about timing analysis and why this can become a problem with certain simulators. So we have seen a flip-flop. With a clock, D and Q. Anytime there is a change in the clock signal, anytime there is a rising edge in the clock, that is when your D is going to come to the output. So I am going to show my D in this format. So typically if your signal is multi-bit, then you can show it like this and say that maybe this value is 3, or I could represent it in binary and say this is 110, etc. Here my D is single bit. There is only one flip-flop. I still want to show it like this because I am right now insensitive to what the value is. Right? So I'll simply say this is some value D0, this is some D1, this is some D2, etc. It doesn't matter whether this value D1 is 0 or 1. The logical value doesn't matter. All that you need to recognize is that the value is changing at this instant. Right? Now, just before a clock edge, right, let's assume the value is changing and you want this D1 value to be clocked to the output. Right? Then you need to make sure that this change in the value is happening sometime before this rising edge of the clock. Right? So for a finite time before the rising edge of the clock, your data should be well set up. It shouldn't fluctuate after that. And this is called as the setup time of the flop. Right? Similarly, for some time after the rising edge of the clock, your data shouldn't fluctuate. It should still hold steady. It should be stable. And this is called as the hold time of the flop. Right? So this is a flip-flop where you are sensitive to positive edges of the clock. If so, around this positive edge of the clock, you'll have a setup time and a hold time constraint. And the exact values of setup and hold time constraint will be dependent on how this flip-flop is implemented. Alright? So the third party vendor who is implementing the flip-flops for you, they have characterized it, and they have this table which tells you what is the expected setup time for the flop, what is the expected hold time for the flop. And the setup and hold time can vary across temperatures, across voltages, etc. So this information is also provided by the third party vendor. So now when you are feeding in some data to this D flip-flop, you have to make sure that in this duration, for example, it is okay if my data was changing 2-3 times here, but just before the setup time, it has to become steady, and it has to be held steady till the hold time is over. After that, if it fluctuates, it is okay for us. Provided we keep the data steady during the setup and the hold time continuously, then this value D1 is correctly clocked to the output. Now, if your data fluctuates during this period, there is a very high chance that you are going to sample the incorrect value to the output. Okay. So now, when you write your HDL code, then you pass it through synthesis, and at all of these stages, after synthesis, after you do the layout, for every single flop in the design, they are going to run the setup and hold checks. Right? Roughly, this is what we call as timing analysis, but I'll explain what static timing analysis is in detail at a later point. So flip-flop, latches, etc. provided by the foundry, they have an associated setup and hold constraint with it, and these are checked by the tool. Now, if you write a sequential element like this, and it gets implemented in the form of a mux like this, there is a high probability that the setup and hold for this latch implementation is not even characterized. Right? So the behavior should have been with respect to this I and the clock. The underlying reasons that is going to give you a setup constraint and a hold constraint is still true for this circuit. But it might not be well characterized because maybe they didn't think that you would write a code like this. Right? So first question, if you have to implement a latch, is to really check if a latch is needed, because latches can sometimes make it harder to achieve timing closure. And if you really find out that the latch was absolutely necessary for the circuit, then you declare it as a register and then implement it. Okay, this is just to be on the safe side. Now, the second interesting question I got was related to a statement I made in the last class, where I said that I cannot have a flop which is sensitive to 2 clocks. So the question asked was, what if, so this is your D flop, what if I did something like this? I use an OR gate and then connect 2 clocks like this. I'm sure when this question was asked, the assumption is you have one clock like this. Let's say this is your clock 1, this is clock 2, and the second clock edge is like this. Therefore, at this node, let me call this as N1, the output is going to look like this. Right? This, if you write a Verilog code with POS of clock 1 or POS of clock 2, this will not get implemented. The tool is directly going to tell you that it is not synthesizable. Again, think about whether this sort of a constraint is really necessary, and if you find that it is necessary, you will have to hard code it. You will have to generate N1 by ORing clock 1 and clock 2, and then feed N1, POS of N1 as a condition in the sensitivity list. Right? But you can see how tricky the circuit is going to be to close the timing, because again, you have to make sure that all the edges of N1 around it, now you have to check for setup and hold. Right? And what if this clock signal slightly got shifted? Let's say it got shifted like this. Suddenly your N1 is going to look like this. which was not the behavior that you wanted. And it's actually quite easy for a clock signal to get shifted like this. Even if you are feeding your signal right, let's say this is your digital whole block and you had 2 ports and you made sure that clock 1 and clock 2 have a fixed phase. The phase relationship between clock 1 and clock 2 is well defined such that you get the expected N1. Even then it is really hard to make sure that the phase relationship is exact. Even if you do this, right, inside the circuit, your clock 1 is going to pass through some buffers, your clock 2 will pass through a different set of buffers, and eventually it will reach the OR gate. There is no guarantee that the delay in both these paths are going to be same, right? And again, it is very easy to have a variation in the delay. Imagine the VDD in the second path is slightly different, maybe because that path is drawing a lot of current, the metal line is having a larger, so there is a metal line that is supplying VDD to this, right? If that path is carrying a lot of current because of other modules connected to the circuit, there will be a large IR drop on that path. Therefore, the VDD seen by this inverter is going to be slightly smaller, right? Now, if that happens, the delay in this path is going to be different. Now, if you were working with very large clock periods, with very high phase difference, very large time delay between these 2 edges, maybe with even all of these delay variations, you might be okay. But this is still a point of, I would say, this is a potential point of failure in your design, and you'll have to verify this multiple times to make sure that it is okay. Is this clear? Now, the third point was, so like we said, if you have several always blocks, all these always blocks are going to get executed at the same time. Now, within an always block, if you use blocking statements, then those statements are going to get executed sequentially. Now, let's say you had 2 different always blocks where there are blocking statements inside. So they get executed, the execution begins at the same time. So the question was, can we comment about the relative latency with which the variables inside are going to get assigned a value, right? Can we rely on that latency? These are blocking statements, which means the first statement will execute it first, then the second statement, then the third statement, etc. Can we rely on that to assign some intermediate value to another variable, right? For this, my answer would be, if your circuit requires this level of latency dependency for it to work correctly, then it's probably not a good code. You rewrite your code such that you can think about things happening at a clock edge and the combinational logic data being ready just before the clock edge so that it can be sampled in onto a flip-flop. Is that clear? Okay, any questions so far? If not, we will continue with our circuits.
So then if we write always at the process variable 1 or variable 2, then this will work.
If you write always at the, so this same example that we have here, right? Negedge of clock or possedge of reset, right? This will not throw an error because the understanding is one is a reset signal that will occur once in a while.
But how will it know that it is a reset signal?
Because you are, so again, for a flop like this, much like there is a condition between I0 and clock, there are timing constraints between reset and clock. So these constraints are called as recovery and removal, but it is similar to how setup and hold constraint is being set for I0 and clock. Right? So if you have an asynchronous reset, then there are timing constraints as to when the reset can be deasserted. So can the reset, so just there is some time required before the deassertion of reset and the clock edge, and similarly there is some timing constraint on a clock edge occurring and the deassertion of reset. So this constraint is also there, and if the flop is well modeled, when you are doing your timing analysis, this also gets checked. Alright, so now let me ask you a question. In this, let's say I simply remove this possedge of reset statement. Can you tell me how would the circuit look like? This was your original code, right? You have the module definition, module and module statements, the name of the circuit. This is a port list. Then you do the input declarations, which is for I0, clock and reset. The output has to be a register because now it's a sequential element, it's out 0. Now this flop is sensitive to both rising edges in clock as well as rising edges in reset. Sorry, falling edges in clock and rising edges in reset. So we put the sensitivity list as neg edge of clock or pos edge of reset. Now, because the reset condition has to have priority, we first check for reset condition, right? Now, if this condition is false, which means that you have entered the definition because of a negative edge in the clock, right? So then you do out 0 less than or equal to I0. Now, all that I have done is I have removed this portion of the code, right? What does this code translate to?
Will like just use a mux with reset in
So you are no longer sensitive to the edges of the reset, right? So you still have the flop. Right? Now your Q can change only at the rising edges of the clock. Right? At the rising edges of the clock, you first need to check reset. If reset is 1, then out is 0, else out is I0, right? So you can think of the implementation as something like this. So reset is connected here. If reset is 1, you need to pass 0. If reset is 0, then your I0 can pass to this. This is the circuit. Is that clear? This became a flop with a synchronous reset implementation. That is, the reset is affecting the output only during the clock edges. Okay. Now let me show you the next circuit. Can you spot the difference? Yes, I have put a knot here. What does this mean?
reset is off, then we have
So this is an active low reset. So typically when you have active low signals, you tend to change the name of the signals also accordingly. So I have called it as reset bar. Okay. So now what should I write here?
negative edge.
So your flop is sensitive to negative edges of the clock or negative edge of reset bar. I changed the name here and here. Anything else I need to change?
Cloud also input.
Yeah. Anything else?
Cloud also.
You want to change clock to clock bar? That is something you can consider. I didn't do it here because typically clock goes through a lot of flip-flops in the design, right? For some of them, it might be triggering with the pos edge. For some of them, it might be triggering with the neg edge. But typically, you will have a single polarity for reset. Either your reset is active high or active low. So that's why I changed the reset name to reset bar, but clock I have for now left it as it is. Is this code going to work? Right? So you have entered the always block because there is a negative edge in the reset, right? Then you can't check whether the reset bar is equal to 1. You should be checking if this is equal to 0. Okay, any questions? Good. So now I have introduced a set pin, right? So if reset bar is 0, then your out 0 has to go 0. If set is 1, then I want the out 0 to go high. If reset bar is 1, set is 0, then out 0 equal to I0. Right? The priority with which you have to treat these signals is first you look for reset bar, then you look for set, then you check if there is a clock edge. Right? Again, because I have connected it directly to the flop like this, the set is also assumed to be an asynchronous set signal. Okay. Now, can you help me write the code? So I'll help you with the first step. I'll add the set signal here. Now what do I do?
Or positive edge of set.
So I need or pos edge of set. Then what else? So first I check for the reset condition. If reset condition is not satisfied, then I have to check for set condition. If that is true, then out 0 equal to 1. Now, if both of these are false, that means that you have entered the always block for execution because of a next edge of the clock. Therefore, out 0 can be directly equal to I0. This is okay? Now, it is possible that the cell library you are working with doesn't have a flip-flop with, clock, reset and set. Typically, almost all standard cell libraries will give you flops with just a clock and reset bar. Whether you will have 3 options is something that you will have to look for. If your standard cell library doesn't have this option, you might get an error if you feed this. But definitely don't put in one more, in the sensitivity list, don't put in one more edge. Typically, you don't have elements that are sensitive to 4 edges. Is that clear? Okay, so in this circuit, I have removed the set and I have added an AND gate here, right? So how do I write for this now? Let's start with the port list. What are the ports? So there is clock, I0, I1, out 0 is there, reset bar, set is not there, right? So let me remove set, put I1 here. I'll remove all the conditions related to set. Now what do I do? So else I naught. So here I can simply say I naught or I1. So this is the operator, sorry, AND. Right? So this is the operator for AND. That's all. Right? This is easy to do. Now if you wanted, you could call this net as some N1. Right? This N1 then becomes an internal net. So I can say, let's say this is wire N1, right? N1 is being driven. It has to take the value continuously. It's not the output of this storage element. And then I have to assign a value to N1. So this will be assign N1 equal to I0 and I1. And here I can directly give N1. Right? This is just to show you that this is also possible. You can have nets that are not part of the port list. It is something internal to the system. You can have register outputs that are internal to the system, and you can declare it separately like this. And then use those in other parts of your code. This is also fine. But ideally, the easiest thing to do would be to simply say I1 or I0, here, I1 and I0 here. Okay. So now I have a mux. Right? Let's keep it simple and let's say I want to have the output written here. Now how do I go about this? So first I have to declare S. Right? So I declare S. Now under the else condition, I can of course write out 0 equal to S bar I0 plus S I1, but I can also write a case statement here. So I can simply do case S. Now if the value of S is 1, if the value of S is 1 dash D0, then my out 0 will be equal to I0. If it is equal to 1 dash D1, then out 0 will be equal to I1. And then end case. This is also fine. Is this clear? Is there a mistake here?
You have to also add an end.
This end, yes, right. This is fine? Okay, so let's make it slightly more complicated. I have a circuit like this. So let me declare I2 for you. Earlier I forgot to declare S as an input, right? Earlier the code should have had an S in the input range. So is something different about the S this time? It has become 2-bit, right? So I have to declare it as a 2-bit number. So that can be done like this, right? It's 2 bits, 1:0, okay? Now I'll directly make changes here. So case S, if it is 1-D0, what is the value? So this is out 0. (1-D1) I1 or I0. For the other two cases, this is equal to I2. So I can do 1-D2, 1-D3 and write the conditions, or because this is a case statement and the other two conditions have the same value, I'm simply going to say default, and under default conditions, which means your S value is not 0 or 1, then you give out 0 equal to I2. Is that okay? Now this default case will come to your rescue when you have S as, let's say, 4-bit and you are interested in only 3 or 4 cases out of it, right? It is a good practice to not leave anything to the tool's imagination. It is a good practice to always tell the tool what value each variable is going to take under all possible conditions. So now if S was a 4-bit number, which means it can take 16-bit value, you need to specify what happens to out 0 for all 16 values of S. And if you are interested only in 3 or 4 of those values, then definitely put a default case.
But if we are using a demux, then we only need the 4 values, right?
If you are using a demultiplexer,
then we only have 4 values, right? Because if like one is 1, then other will be 0 in my circuit always.
so I'm talking about a regular multiplexer, right? Let's say you had a multiplexer where this was 4 bits, right? So potentially it could have taken values from 0 to 50.
I mean decoder, sorry.
If you're using a decoder, then
Every time I use the decoder, only one of the wires will be 1 and other will be 0, right?
correct.
So why would I like define all the values for all the cases?
No, so we are right now implementing a system like this, right? So you're trying to implement this and there is some out here. You want to make sure the value of the out is defined under all possible conditions. Now if it is not designed, when you run it through the synthesis tool, it can do something called as latch inference, meaning it will assume that if the values are, let's say you defined something saying this should be I0, this should be I1, you didn't mention what the others are, right? And for some reason you used a 4-bit number here. Now if you don't specify what the out value is, some of the synthesis tools will directly connect this out here, assuming that you wanted the previous value to be held. Then the tool is now trying to infer a latch from your definition, and typically if this is not what you intended, right, you might not even check if the output is correct in trying to hold the previous value. You might have glitches here. So always make sure that the value of the out, each variable, is defined under all possible cases. If it's a wire, it's a continuous assignment, it's automatically taken care of. It's inside these register implementations that sometimes you have inferred latches. This is okay?
So when a latch is inferred, that tool connects output to the input, or it actually makes a latch?
It connects the output to the input. Now once it is inferred, probably depends on the algorithms in the tool and whether a latch is available in the standard cell library, right? I am not sure in what way it can go. That is why even the statements would go like a latch may be inferred, right? They depends on the tool, heavily depends on the algorithms in the tool. But you don't want to take a risk, so if you did not mean it to be a latch, then immediately put in the required value.
So I've changed it to 2-bit condition. So if you haven't changed the case name to 2-bit, won't do an error.
Oh, right, absolutely correct. I should do this as 2 dash D0. Right? That is correct. Yeah. Okay. Now let's say I want to implement a counter. So this counter has a clock input. The counter is going to count at the rising edges of the clock. This has a reset. The output is 4-bit. So it is count 3:0, right? I'll give you 2 minutes. Can you try implementing it? Then we'll discuss the answer together. So because this is 4 bits, how would the counter behavior be? It will go like 0, 1, 2, 3. What is the maximum value it can take? 15. What do you expect to happen after that? It will go back to 0, right? So I can see a lot of you sketching individual modules, adders, flops, etc. Let me show you how I can directly model its behavior, right? So I'll say module, counter, tell me the inputs and outputs. There is clock, reset, and we had a count as the output. Right? Now we do the input and output declarations. What are the inputs? Clock, is it wire or register? Is clock wire or a register? It's a wire. Reset? Wire. Right? Output? Is count wire or register? Register. And this is 3:0 count. Right? So always at pos edge of reset, right? The behavior of the count should change during positive edges of the reset and during positive edges of the clock. So or pos edge of clock, begin. If it is reset, so reset equal to 1, what happens to the count?
0.
So it is 4-D0. Else, what should happen to the count? It should increment by 1. Right? So count plus 1-D1. And that's it.
Actually, 4-D4.
This one is it, 4 dash. So you just need to add 1 bit to it. Right? It is not necessary that what is being added has to be 4 bit. Right? So this is okay. I had another question. What about the overflow? Because count is only 4 bits. If an overflow happens, the carry bit goes off and the rest of it is there. Beautiful, is it? Right? Isn't it? Like you write a 1-line code, the synthesis tool is going to translate this into a 4-bit adder to implement this.
So we not need to initialize value of count.
How would you initialize the value of the count?
I would put 0.
Right. But now I have a chip. Right? How do I put zeros inside? I need to give a reset to the chip. Right? And that condition is encoded here. If reset goes high, then the values, 0 value is loaded.
So at the first positive edge of the clock, and let's say reset is 0 all the time, it will automatically give 0 as well.
If the reset was always 0, which means you are powering on the chip and then you are not resetting the chip, right? Then you don't have a control on what the initial value is. Because the chip was powered on from, because it was powered on, there's a small possibility that all of them have 0 value because all the internal capacitances are 0. Possibly if it was powered off for a very long time, there is no reason to assume that the charges will hold in all the capacitors. So very high probability that it might start from 0, but it's also possible that the powering on process, where your VDD suddenly goes from 0 to high value, resulted in some cross coupling to the output and turned one of them to 1. Very small possibility, but you can't roll it out. Which is why you always need to reset digital circuits before you start. There are cases where, you know, initial some garbage data being in is okay because it will get flushed out with correct data. In such cases, maybe reset is not needed. But as a general rule, whenever you have, you know, memory elements, you reset it and then start. Okay. Any other questions on this? Okay. So now we have designed our counter. We have written a Verilog code for it. We want to test if our counter is working, right? Let's say whenever you want to test whether something that you have designed is working, we simulate for it, right? And to simulate something, you need to give inputs to it and look at its output. So for this, we create what is called as a test bench for our counter. Right? For now, you can think of this test bench as a wrapper within which you will put this counter and then give inputs and look at the outputs. So this is your counter module. Right? You need to instantiate within a test bench, which is also a Verilog code, by the way, and then you need to feed a clock signal, right? Just to differentiate it from the port name of CLK, I'll call this as CLOCK, clock, right? You need to give a reset signal, so something like this, and then you need to take this out and observe the signal. So I am going to call this as simply out. Okay. So for this, we will now write a test bench code. The need for a test bench is clear, right? You might have written a big code and you want to verify if you give a certain input vectors, whether the output is as expected. So you're going to simulate it for a large set of input vectors, and then you'll keep looking whether the output is as expected corresponding to the input vector. So now we will start writing a test bench. So module, I can give this test bench any name, but in general, it's a good practice to keep all your variable names, your module names, as close as possible to the actual implementation, actual behavior it is trying to do. So I'll call this as counter test bench. Can you tell me the input and output ports for this test bench? So I hear clock, reset, out. Are there ports of the test bench? Is it coming from outside the test bench? No, right? So the test bench does not have any ports. Is that clear? This particular test bench does not have any ports because nothing is coming from outside the test bench. You're not feeding anything to outside the boundary of the test bench. Everything is internal to it. So the port list is empty. We also have int module out of it. Okay. So now we have to declare all the nets and registers that are part of this test bench. Can you tell me what would be clock? Right? So at this stage, I'm sure you're also not able to recognize whether clock has to be a register or a wire, right? But given that with a register implementation, I can do both combinational and sequential, I'm going to go with register for now. So I say register clock. What about reset and count? Let's look at reset. So same idea that I described earlier. So I'll make reset also as a register. What comment can you make about out? Right? It is being driven by a port. It is being driven by this port. Therefore, I declare out as a wire. So I call wire 3:0 out. Okay. So now I want to assign values to both the clock as well as the reset, right? And let's say I want clock and reset to start with a value 0 initially. Because they are declared as registers, I can assign values to them either inside an always block or inside something called as an initial block. So initial block is very similar to always block for all purposes, except that it gets executed only once. It starts the execution at the beginning of the simulation, finishes all the statements inside it, and it is done. That's it. Your always block is executed every time something in the sensitivity list changes. Initial block gets executed only once. So let's say in the beginning, I want to reset my counter. So I make reset equal to 0. I want to now generate a clock signal. Here also let me start with the clock signal being 0. Now of course you can do 1-B and 1-B. Right? So I have initialized it to 0. Now let's generate a clock signal. I can do this using an always statement. So I'll say always for every 2000 points, make my clock as not of clock. Right? So every 2000 time points, you invert the clock signal. Right? Then what would be the time period of the clock? It will be 4000 time points, right? But I've been saying time points, now I need to connect it to seconds, right? So you do that using a time scale directive. So this particular symbol is the one that comes along with tilde, the top left corner of your keyboard. So you say time scale. I'll explain what this is in a minute. 1 nanosecond bar 1 nanosecond, let's say. Maybe 1 picosecond. So this 1 nanosecond tells you what the time point that refers, that is associated with this 2000 is. So if you write 1 nanosecond here, that means that this is 2000 nanosecond and your clock period is 4000 nanosecond. The number that you write here tells you what is the simulation time step. So your simulation is now going to run at 0 picosecond, 1 picosecond, 2 picosecond, etc. Right? Now if I kept this as 1 nanosecond, then it means that your simulation is running at 0, 1 nanosecond, 2 nanosecond, etc. The simulation time step, the time step with which you are evaluating all the variables in your Verilog code, right? That is written here. Now clearly your time period cannot be smaller than this. So this is something you can do. Now if I had written it as 1 picosecond, I could have given 2000.1 here also. Because anyways the simulation time step can account for this pointer. Okay, so I have now created the clock. I have assigned the initial values for reset and clock. What else do I need to do? What is missing in this code? Right, I didn't connect the counter here. So to connect the counter, the easiest way to do is to simply copy the statement. Right? And let's say I have to instantiate it. So the name of the type of the object that I'm instantiating is counter type. For example, in LTSpice, if you have 10 resistors, all of these are of resistor type, right? But it will have an instance name. You might call it as R1, R2, R3, etc. So similarly, this is of type counter and I need to give an instance name to it. So I'll simply say I1. Okay. So now I need to, there are two ways by which I can connect this CLK pin to the clock signal. One is simply by the order in which the pins have been declared. So if I write clock, reset and out, right? In the right order, now the clock pin of the counter is connected to this clock value. The reset pin of the counter is connected to this, out is connected to this. So I simply make sure that when I declare, when I pass in the variables, I pass it in the same order in which it was declared for the counter module. Right? So this is called as connecting by order or positional connection. But this is not a good practice. Let's say when you have a module with large number of pins. So you have a module with 50 to let's say 80 pins, right? Then you can't, anytime you make a small variation, you have to keep counting what is the position number in which you need to write something. So a better approach is to connect by name. So to do that, so let's say I want to connect the clock pin. On the counter, the name of the clock pin was CLK. To this, I need to connect clock. On the counter module, the name of the reset pin was reset. To this, I pass my reset signal. Similarly, you have count and out being passed through this. Is this okay? So how I tend to think about this is, right? So what you write is dot clock like this. So I tend to think about this as a pipe that has the name clock through which you are passing the argument into it. Alright, so we have instantiated the counter, given an instance name and connected everything. Will this work? Why will it not work? We did not check for? So yeah, the output is connected to out, right? So in your simulation test bench, you can plot out and then you will be able to see, right? Will this work?
There should be a non-zero time for which reset is.
There should be a non-zero.
I mean, we are not making reset where to one.
We are not, correct, right? So you connect this, the simulation will run, but your counter will not work because the counter is always in reset, right? So we have to make your reset 1. So say you wait for 1000 nanoseconds and make your reset equal to 1. Right? So for the first 1000 nanoseconds, your reset is 0. After that, the reset becomes 1. And then every 2000 nanoseconds, so the first at 2000 nanoseconds, the clock will start switching. And then you will be able to see the out going as 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. Now, if you want to test it better, maybe let's say after some 10,000 nanoseconds, you make the reset equal to 0 again. And let's say after 100 nanoseconds after that, you make the reset equal to 1. So this way you can add in more conditions in your initial block to check that your counter is resetting correctly after a while and then again starting from 0 after that. Is this clear? Okay, thank you.